We're going to go ahead and get started with the session, virtual event models that work, delivering revenue, reach, and repeat participation. Melinda Kendall, Vice President of Immersive Marketing, is going to start us off.
Okay. And I think there's some housekeeping as far as how people ask questions. Do you have those instructions, Lori?
Sure. If you have a question, we're actually going to take questions after each of the different case studies. So if you'll raise your hand, I'll come over with the mic and you can submit questions that way. I'll also be monitoring the Twitter feed. So if you have any questions from the virtual audience, we'll be happy to take those also.
Great, and thank you everyone for coming. Again, I'm Melinda Kendall. I am Vice President at Immersive Marketing and our sister company, Champion Exposition Services. And welcome to those who are coming in from cyberspace. What we have is a great group of panelists who each have a different way that they're using virtual event platforms. And I really like to talk now about virtual event platforms, virtual environments, because as I talk with our clients and people all over the industry, while a lot of associations and corporate clients are using virtual event platforms, there's a lot of different business models people are using. You have the virtual event model where you have the physical event and, you have the hybrid model where you have the physical event going on and the virtual event that tries to really replicate it as much as possible. It's happened simultaneously. And that's what most people, I think of, but there are so many other ways to use this technology. As we heard in the keynote this morning, the virtual event happening before or after the physical event, not tied to a physical event at all, happening sporadically throughout the year. And as many case studies as we had this morning, I think we have 3 that even add to that are different ways of using technology. So what we thought we'd do is each of our panelists is going to speak for about 10 minutes and review what they did and why they chose the model that they chose, how that's bringing them revenue, or if revenue wasn't the point, how it's helping them in other ways to drive attendance to their physical event or whatever else they're doing, why it fits into the business model for their company. And then we'll take a couple questions after each, or I'll give a question, and then after all 3 are done, then we'll have a more open discussion if that works. I'd like to introduce our panelists. This is Karen Niles. She's the Director of Professional Development for the American Speech Language Hearing Association, which is a professional membership organization representing more than 140,000 speech language pathologists, audiologists, and speech and hearing scientists. Then we have Kevin Novak, who is the Vice President of Integrated Web Strategy and Technology for the American Institute of Architects. He's directly responsible for the implementation of an institute-wide web and technology strategy. And we have Lance Simon, who is Vice President Business Development for iCohere, which is headquartered in Walnut Creek. Lance has 28 years experience selling, implementing, and managing enterprise software products and services. And if I could just start with an observation, if you notice the titles, we have a managing director, we have a director of professional development, we have a technology guy who was clearly hired specifically for that technology experience. I hope you'll talk about that. And we have a business development guy. And I think that's something that's worth talking about as we proceed, that various organizations, the people who bubble up to run the virtual events really vary from organization to organization. So Karen.
Thank you, Melinda. I'm going to talk to you about a completely online conference. This is not tied to any in-person event. We actually ran this conference 2 times in 2010. It's a time-bounded event, so you'll see it was live for a date certain period of about 2 weeks. The core content was a set of 20 pre-recorded lectures, total of 27 hours of recorded content, and then we wove around that synchronous and asynchronous discussion. Our objectives were to introduce speech-language pathologists to online conferences. Speech-language pathologists, if you have seen the King's speech, okay, that was a speech-language pathologist who was working with the King to help his fluency issue. His modern colleagues are our members. Speech-language pathologists are not particularly they're not leading-edge technology users. shall we say. So this was going to be the first online event for most of our SLP participants. Of course, we wanted to deliver an outstanding learning experience, we always do, but we needed to do that because we also needed to generate net revenue. And therefore, we had to get people to pay to try this brand new experience. This is a screenshot of one of our blast emails promoting the conference. All of our marketing was online. It was all designed to drive people to the web where they could get more information. We were working with two big engines in our favor. Engine number one is that autism is the hottest topic that there is for speech-language pathologists right now. Engine number two is that most speech-language pathologists have continuing education requirements linked to maintaining either their state license or their certification. And so to get continuing education credits is an issue. So in our marketing, we tried to summarize what an online conference would be. Namely, it includes 20 recorded lectures, scheduled live chats, asynchronous discussions, and we tried to convey the core of the content that they would get. The hardest thing we found to get them to understand was that this was a time-bounded experience that included both on-demand elements and scheduled elements. That was very hard. Our core content, as I said, was a set of 20 recorded lectures. We recorded them in advance over a period of 6 to 8 weeks, well in advance of the conference. That meant we could flex around our speakers' schedules. That meant we could assemble a set of speakers that we would never ever be able to get in the same physical location at the same physical time. So that was a huge draw for us. The set of speakers that we were able to present to our members was stellar. This is a screenshot of one of the landing pages for one of the lectures. We pictured the presenter. We told people how the duration in minutes of this lecture so they would know how long it was going to take. We told them where to find additional resources, and we encouraged them to post to one of the asynchronous discussion threads. This is a screenshot of one of those discussion threads. Participants could pose questions, they could make comments, and our presenters and others could respond and reply. We did not require our presenters to agree to monitor their discussion threads, but we found that universally they did. They not only monitored their own threads, they monitored each other's and cross-contributed. So the asynchronous discussions were actually very vigorous and exceeded our expectations. At the end of this iteration of the conference, we had logged almost 35,000 discussion posts. We also encouraged people to network in our online conference. This is a screenshot of a page where a participant would set up an individual profile. They could upload their photo. They could list areas of professional interest. They could search for others with similar profiles and interests. And again, we were encouraged by the extent to which participants took advantage of that. So the results. We budgeted for 300 registrants at about $300 each. $300 would be a typical amount that someone might expect to pay for an in-person 2-day event. Our strategy was to peg the price to that, but deliver more content, more hours of credit for the same amount of money, and of course no travel involved. We secretly hoped for 500. We thought with our blockbuster topic and speakers that was well within reach. And we actually enrolled over 850. So after the event, when we were debriefing on what had gone well, what we would do differently, one of my colleagues had the brilliant idea. She said, "I think we should do the whole thing again." And the light dawned. It's like we had this set of 20 recorded lectures to which we owned the rights. So in fact, we rolled out the whole conference again in July, August, scheduling a fresh set of chats, and we enrolled 580 more participants. So our total registration was over 1,400, and our gross revenue was over $430,000. Now, my unit normally grosses about $2 million a year, so this was a big single event bump to our normal activity. This is how the financials compare for our 2 iterations of the Autism Conference, that's the blue bar, compared to a comparable 2.5-day in-person event directed at the same audience, which typically gets about 1,000 attendees. They both bring in right around $430,000. Our in-person conference has about $50,000 to $60,000 of that is exhibit revenue. We did not have an exhibit in conjunction with our online conference. That's for the future. But look at the difference in direct expenses to mount that 2.5-day in-person conference versus 2 iterations of the online event. The direct expenses for 2 iterations of the online conference were about $50,000, leading to that very pleasing result for the net revenue. But this is where it really delivered for us. This was overall participant satisfaction. We always ask people for every event, no matter what else we measure, we have one item on a 5-point scale. We say, what is your overall satisfaction with this event? For our in-person conference, overall satisfaction on a 5-point scale was 4.31. That's pretty typical. It's pretty good. We're pretty happy with that. For our March conference, overall participant satisfaction was 4.71, and it went up to 4.78 out of 5 across hundreds of participants for the second online iteration. What drove that? What people tell us is content for them was king. They loved being able to get all the content. They loved not having to choose between competing concurrent sessions. They loved being able to do it on their own schedule. And they found in the online environment they had better interaction, more access to the speakers, more topic-focused conversation with participants from all over the world than they would get in a typical in-person experience. So, if your task is to introduce an online conference to a brand new audience, I would say lead from your strength. For us, that was the topic and the prospect of a large number of continuing education units. Take advantage of the fact that you can record in advance, so that does let you review, edit, and revise the presentations. For us, what that meant was encouraging presenters to drop out the initial slide or 2 where every single one of them wanted to start by establishing the incidence and prevalence of autism in the population. We know that, we get that, we don't need to hear it 20 times from each speaker. And finally, deliver superior interaction, because you can do that online, and structure your agreements so that you can reuse the content. Don't skimp on support. I don't have good metrics for you about the level of staff effort that it took to develop and deploy our online conferences compared to in-person. I can assure you it took a lot of effort. Our feeling as a team is that overall it probably was about the same level of effort to develop and deploy an in-person event with exhibits and all of that as the online conferences, but it was a lot. Don't underprice to attract participation. That's my advice to you. You'll hear from Kevin a different story. But it is hard to go from a very low sell or free to a paid experience. So we chose to price it fairly aggressively for our audience and then deliver a better experience than they expect. And finally, we found that calling it a virtual conference, which is what we started to do, was very confusing for our folks. They could get online. They didn't get virtual. Would they have an avatar? Would they have to wear glasses? I mean, they found virtual very scary. And I also find it a little satisfying not to peg this as a virtual event. Virtual still has a connotation of being an almost true replica of the real thing. And that's not the case. Our online conference is the real deal. And that's the message I would leave with you. Kevin.
Terrific. So Karen, I have a couple questions for you. And of course, you offer CEUs, so that probably affects your pricing model. Now, ASHA does have an excellent large physical event, and I think that's run by a different department. But did you work with the meeting planners there? Is there any tie-in? Do you see any tie-in in the future, any opportunity for these events to drive their attendance, or you're going to keep them completely separate?
We do have plans to begin capturing live content from our in-person convention and making that available in a hybrid sort of environment. But we will also move forward with doing online conferences that are completely untethered to any in-person event.
And currently you don't offer sponsorships to this content, but I think you hinted that that's something you're thinking about.
Yeah, for us moving forward, what we want to do is attract exhibit and sponsor support for these, which we have not done so far. But we think with proof of concept that we can bring large audiences, relatively large audiences, to these events, that's the next phase for us.
Do we have any questions now for Karen, or shall we keep moving?
Can you talk a little bit more about the speakers and recordings? Were they accepting of that when they have no feedback, and when they're doing their presentations, were they comfortable with that? Where they're used to being in front of people and getting reactions? How did that all system work?
That's a very interesting question. Most of them were very comfortable with it once they understood what it would be like, and they were delighted not to have to get on an airplane to go and make their presentation. The people we were working with are very accomplished, they're very frequent presenters. They present a lot. Many of them had, in fact, done some virtual presentations before. We generally scheduled 2 hours of time to record a 1-hour lecture. They were recorded slide by slide remotely using the telephone from wherever the speaker was. And once they would get into the rhythm, it went pretty well. It was not unusual to re-record the first couple of slides until the speaker hit their stride and got comfortable. We encouraged speakers to incorporate video in the lectures. Most of them did. So we had lots of examples of their, clients and therapists working together, and that's like candy to our members. They can't stay away from that.
All right, let's move on and hear from Kevin.
I want to start with sort of where our environment was at the time and cover some of our objectives. Back in 2008 and 2009, the architect profession was probably the worst hit with the economic conditions. And we started to look at opportunities to really improve member value and be there for the architects, given that we are indeed a membership association. There was also significant recognition there were greater technology and web adoption, something Melinda mentioned earlier with us, and the reason I was brought into AIA was to try to really expand and take advantage of the web and technology opportunities for the members. We also recognized there was improved delivery and experiential methods. I'll talk about some of those shortly. We had needs of changing demographics, and quite different in contrast to some of what Karen talked about. Our typical demographic is over 40 white male. They weren't quite adept at technology. They weren't adopting it as quick, but we had a significant portion of membership who were now younger, called the emerging professionals. We also recognized that we needed to begin to expand the reach of the physical event. The AIA convention is a 3-day physical event, and with the emerging professionals and some of the feedback from members, there was a need to greatly make that something quite different. Our opportunities outside of the economic and member value conditions, where our members definitely want connection to new products. They are at the forefront and in design phase of buildings that we're going to see 5 to 10 years from now. So they really need to understand from a sustainability perspective what is available to them as they start to design these great buildings or spaces. Our physical convention was always something where they actually came and found a significant amount of new product and opportunity for services. Our members for different state licensing boards all have a continuing ed requirement. The physical convention offers them a significant opportunity to get most of that all at one time. And through a lot of the AIA providers of continuing ed, we've seen a lot of use of on-demand. So like mentioning before, the acclimation to the web and technology, the members were beginning to be exposed to that. A little background on our physical convention. It's one of the largest shows, at least that's what AIA puts out there in America, typically having between 22 and 25,000 attendees. On average, we only have 7,000 to 8,000 actual AIA members who are attendees. The rest are just general people who are interested, exhibitors, providers, and the like. We offer 400 education sessions and over 900 physical exhibitors. It is a truly monstrous show. Sure, nothing like CES, which was here last week, but it's quite overwhelming. Our typical attendee, after doing a lot of different research, we discovered that they come from a 300-mile radius. We're limited to the cities that we do in the U.S. We can't go international because it is indeed the American Institute of Architects, and there's a desire not to go international. And we find that just recently in Miami that was very difficult for people to get to. There were several planes that members and others had to get on to get to that physical event. So what AIA has done. Again, we started in 2008, at the end of 2008 with some planning for 2009, and we did this within 6 weeks. There was a lot of reluctance in the organization to actually go this route. We had talked about it a lot, and finally, given the economic conditions, my CEO says we need to do this. So within 6 weeks, we delivered 14 free streamed and on-demand sessions for the convention. We were in San Francisco at the time. We focused on content selection on what members needed most. Going back to that regionalism of our conferences with the San Francisco Convention, we were in California. California had recently introduced new ADA requirements for the design profession. So those tended to be huge sessions. To your question earlier, we had, if we would have 19 people in a room, the presenter would be a little disappointed. And we quickly go tap him on the back and say, you have 2,500 people online watching, which improved his or her mood greatly. We really focused a lot, given the interest in new product, on the virtual exhibits. We had 75. We also, given the economic conditions, offered resume services, career counseling services, networking opportunities, all within our virtual environment. We integrated with social media, allowing questions that come in via Twitter and a variety of other mechanisms, and presented those in real time. We adapted the platform to follow the physical attendance experience, which is quite different than what Karen was saying. We really, given that the membership really loves the convention, we really wanted to make sure they were getting the same type of experience virtually. Our revenue model, again, we offered for free the first year. We focused on some sponsorship, exhibitor revenue, and web ads. The whole event cost us about $100,000 extra than what we would typically spend for the convention. We made a minuscule amount of that money back, so we actually just ate the cost. Our results, we had 2,000 virtual exhibit attendees, and I'll show some of the different statistics related to that shortly, and 17,000 streaming attendees, so it was quite successful. In 2010, because we were a little bit cocky and said, wow, this really worked, we're really just going to blow the roof off this thing, we offered 36-page streamed and on-demand sessions, which made things incredibly more complex. We offered expanded attendance options to all physical attendees, so if you had registered for the physical event, you were kind of lazy, partied a little bit too late because architects love to party, want to stay in your room, you could watch these instead of getting up and going physically to the convention center. We decreased the focus on virtual exhibits, a lot of that being economic conditions. The exhibitors really were questioning the value because it's in at least the architect building space, a lot of that is new to them. And they're not quite understanding yet the value. The first year seemed to be more hype. Again, we did social media integration. The revenue model, we did paid registration, sponsorship, exhibitor revenue, and web ads. This one cost us about $150,000. That paid versus free really changed the dynamic, and I'll hit on that towards the end of the presentation. As a result, we only had 1,000 virtual attendees and 3,000 streaming attendees. Now, in both instances, we captured all the on-demand content. That continues to be very popular. We continue to try to make some money up from the 2010 convention as an offset. What I think has been very interesting for us is related to the virtual exhibition results. We had 2,000 attendees over 3 days. 93% were non-convention attendees, which meant that they were the people attending virtually. 3/4 of the total virtual conference participants were AIA members, which is really what we were targeting. Almost half of the attendees visited during the convention days, so there shows some hype that there really did need to be some connection to the physical event. They spent 3,100 hours on the site, which was really interesting. for almost 2 hours per attendee. The show was live for 3 months. We've done that and will continue to do that so that they did see somebody in the exhibition and didn't quite get time to talk or get the materials, they have the opportunity to do so. How we did it. We did a lot of research with Gartner, a lot of phone calls with their analysts, a lot of surveys out to the available technologies and platforms, and decided to take the integrated approach. I can't say enough for Blue Sky Broadcast and an expo. Blue Sky offers a great solution. There are a myriad of technical details which Karen alluded to, the technical and programmatic aspects, the technical support, the physical location coordination, because you're not only dealing with the convention staff and the union issues, you're also bringing in a video crew to do the stream and capture the on-demand and turn that over within a 24-hour period. So if anybody is deciding to do this, the integrated approach, and hiring somebody like Blue Sky or an expo to really manage a lot of details is what I would strongly recommend. Our lesson learned, know your demographic. As I highlighted in 2009, we offered for free, great success. 2010, we charged, not such great success. We think from a marketing perspective, we tipped a point. We were charging $165 for access to all 36 sessions. We think we really hit a mark with the members that they just weren't comfortable in the current economic conditions and work environment to pay that amount of money. Lesson learned for us, next year we're really going to try to do some things differently. As a practical point, caution with broadcasting panel discussions. As Karen mentioned, when you're doing video and you're capturing it and it's not live, you have the ability to work out different details and smooth things out. When you're doing live, we had several panels where there were 4 to 6 participants. As they watched the clock tick, they started to talk faster. So the online representation, the speech actually got separated from the slide progression. And we received some negative feedback for that because the virtual attendees were getting lost in the presentation. CE and topical content results and high interest in participation. We definitely have experienced that both times. Talked about the integrated approach. We feel that our market interest has been solidified with the 2009. What we really need to do now is just play around with the revenue models and the different opportunities to present content. Continue to match the physical experience as close as possible with the virtual. And just to highlight again the pay model, just be very careful in experimenting, and it really just goes back to what your demographic is. There are a lot of great lessons learned out there. There are a lot of best practices, but those tend to be very generalized. And as we experienced, we thought those would work, that we didn't quite equate well to the demographic and what they were willing to do. Where are we heading in 2011? As Karen talked about, we're looking to separate the physical from the virtual event. We are going to have an event virtually that surrounds the physical convention. But based on the success of a lot of the on-demand material that we're offering, we feel that we can sort of break that apart a bit to allow a longer life and a greater flexibility. One of the things I wanted to, we sort of went a little crazy towards the end of last year and hosted a conference or developed a conference that was in 5 physical locations at one time as well as virtual. It was based in DC and then had 5, and we had speakers in each area. That was a logistical nightmare that actually came off quite successful, but we continue to play with different models to better understand what our members are really looking for and where they would feel the most benefit is. Some of the questions I think anybody needs to think about, and this is all based on our experience, does the physical, the geographic location matter? As we found in the example I gave you about California with the ADA requirements, I think that added to the success of the event. The Miami seemed a little more remote for people. There wasn't quite the impetus for running to get some particular continuing ed, and that may have had an impact. As I shared, cost and fee do impact use. Is the content value proposition enough to generate the interest? Does the type of content stream matter? Is popularity based on economic conditions, or is attendance sustainable over time? And that's something that we're really looking to learn. Was the downturn in 2009 or in 2008 really why our events have been successful so far, and when the economy improves, things may change? Does virtual conference cannibalize on-site attendance? There's been incredible worry in the organization and with our partners that this is something that is going to happen in 2 years. So far we haven't seen that. Again, part of that regionalism of who attends our convention, we're not sure we're ever going to see that. But it's fears that are out there, and that really does compromise planning and just getting people behind doing these kind of things.
On the other hand, the other way to look at the impact of a virtual event on the physical event is, would it enhance attendance by offering that appetizer to a new audience? Anything you're able to comment on there, or were you able to track anything?
Not yet.
And as we talk about revenue models, you had sponsors for your virtual event.
Yes.
How did that go? Was it successful for them?
What we did for the streamed and on-demand was offer a package to our sponsors to get a slot or two inserted prior to the presentation. That seemed to go very well. The challenge with us the first year was that we had 6 weeks before we actually had the physical and virtual event. Our business development staff was a bit crazed with actually reaching out to our exhibitors and others to donate and pay for the sponsorship. One of the other challenges is a lot of these guys are already very much associated with the physical convention. As I mentioned with the exhibitors, they were questioning what the value add was because we didn't quite have the proof yet. And I still don't think we have the proof for the exhibitors to get a higher level of participation on this.
Now, your exhibitors, you said they were able to insert a slide and sponsor a session. Did they not have virtual booths?
75 of them the first year had virtual booths, and that was, again, because we offered that for free. The second year, we de-emphasized the focus, but again, we only had 25 because we were charging. And a lot of them being small mom and pop selling particular product weren't quite comfortable with saying, okay, I'm going to pay my $2,000 and there is some business value with me doing so. And part of that is their own adoption of the web and technology and understanding the space.
Sure. Do we have a question for Kevin?
First of all, thanks for being so honest. Question relates to one of the things you said in one of your summary slides, which seems to be different than what you said in another place.
Okay.
You said try and replicate the virtual experience from the physical experience, and yet it seems to me that the consumers of your virtual experience are different customers than your physical experience. So could you explain that?
Sure. Given that regionalism, we're going to continue to have a virtual aspect attached to the physical convention and deliver that closest possible experience because that's what the members are looking for. In the future, we're recognizing that our participation is greater. When you have the 24,000 and only 8,000 of those are members, there's other ways or other virtual things that we need to do to deliver the CE content. So there are engineers and others that partake in our continuing education, and so it's an opportunity for them. So it's not meant to be a contradiction. We're sort of doing multiple things in our discovery mode.
Terrific. All right, Lance.
Well, I'm going to be channeling Tom Manning and Carol Francois and the event team at Learning Forward, and I was the person that worked with them on structuring how they would do this event, but I was also the producer on site in Atlanta actually doing it. So I'm really thrilled to be able to talk about this event. This was just about 45 days ago in August. And when our kids come home and they tell us that they have a half day off or a full day off because it's a professional day at school and we don't know what that is, and it's our teachers and principals and counselors getting trained, it's the members of Learning Forward that are in our schools doing that training. These are all the professional development people. And they come to this conference as an annual conference. Learning Forward is tiny in comparison to my two colleague staff, 15 staff. But they do a large annual conference. This year it was in Atlanta. And they have 13,000 members and about 3,000 that come. So it was 3,100 actually last year. This year it was down to 2,800. And I don't know if others are seeing that general drop-off in annual conference, but there's whole states where teachers can just not travel anymore for professional development. So for the first time they decided to take a selection of their sessions, all of the plenary sessions and a section of their workshops, and then a distinguished lecture series which wasn't so successful or popular, and put those out to the web. And the goal was to reach out to the 70% of members that can't come to the conference, and to also start to model how financially this would be a revenue generator. On-site registrations, this was paid. People had to pay to do the virtual conference. And on-site registrations varied from $300 to $600 depending on when you signed up. The virtual conference rate was $350 for non-members, $300 for members, and something that turned out to be surprisingly popular for them was $1,000 for 5 people. They had some people who got together in their schools, got together in other sites, got together in libraries, and actually did the workshops together. This is a screenshot of what remote attendees saw in the site, and basically an agenda that took them through the 3 days of content. There were 45 hours of live sessions, including day number 3 where there was a post-conference that was also broadcast. But what I really want to focus on, I think that the general plenary sessions have been very well covered. But what Learning Forward did that I think is the unique aspect here is they did real workshops, 2 to 3 hour hands-on workshops where the rooms were not organized like this. They were all round tables. They had 100 to 150 people in the room, and these were professional leaders who were doing workshops that would go for a while, then they would stop. They'd have written materials. The tables had to work together, then report out. You know the drill, that kind of session. So for almost 100% of the participants, this was a new experience. They had done webinars, and Learning Forward actually has a very robust webcast series that they do, but they had never done a virtual conference, let alone done this kind of longer, more intensive workshop that really requires people working together, virtual remote attendees working together. So there was a lot of hand-holding involved, I think more than we realized there would be. We had to have support, live support in every single session, helping people with various problems, that they experienced, especially the first day. There was extensive site tours and online help desk and all of that. One of the hits from the conference is always a challenge to tie the people who are on site to the remote participants. The remote participants want to know what's going on at the physical venue. This actually turns out to be one of the most popular parts of the site, and we just got volunteers to go around and just do photo blogging. It just didn't matter if they just took some pictures of different content, different sessions, some of the plenaries, and brought it to us. Either we could upload it, they could upload it, and people really enjoyed looking at that and commenting on the photos. So I mentioned that it was new for the attendees. But because of these workshops, we had to work with 15 presenters, workshop presenters. Not one of them had ever done a workshop where they had remote participants. They really did not know how to do it. They knew how to handle everything in the room, but sometimes they have some flexibility depending on how it's going. They need to be more structured. So there was work up front and actually a script that was done for each session. All of the handouts were available in the site, and people had to actually sign up for each workshop that they were going to do, just like they would do if they were an on-site attendee. But I got to tell you, one of the things that we found and one of the learnings that we had is that this still is somewhat different for a remote participant, and we were really surprised at how much people came into a workshop, experienced it for 30 minutes, left the workshop, because there were 3 going on at one time, went into another one, kind of checked out what was going on there, and then would come back in. Much more fluctuation than you would see in actual physical rooms. So some of the things that we had to train the speakers on. There were 2 cameras. A shot like this would not work for 3 hours. It just bores you to tears, right? So we had one wide shot, and then we also had another camera that was on the instructor, and then would come back, and as people were asking questions, was on them. We had to train the people. As you can see, the instructor here was doing pretty well. Sometimes we were catching backs of heads of people for long periods of time. Had to really train the instructors on how to use one of the cameras. That camera is the web. That's what we would tell them. That camera is the internet. You got to talk to those people. You got to imagine that they're in the room. You got to tell them what to do. Tell them what you expect of them at this breakout that's coming out, and tell them when to come back. So they would do that, and there was this whole set of breakouts that would happen during each of the sessions. Again, there were 3 of these going on in the room, so we had facilitation people in each of the rooms, and there was a timer that would be displayed, as well as a discussion chat forum that you can't see in this window that all of the remote participants would share. And then we also had a struggle with getting all of the people in the room to use a microphone. It seems so easy, but when you're going for 3 hours, some of these discussions become very personal. People are really sharing a lot of stories, and so we had to have someone in each room that was assigned to be the microphone person. They would just shove the microphone in someone's mouth to get them, because otherwise the people on the web, we would just get a lot of complaints if they couldn't hear what was going on in the room. So then how did we bring the comments back into the room from the people on the web? Well, we could have done audio. We could have actually done audio streams of people, but I'll explain we did something different with the phone lines. But we had like a radio broadcaster in each room. In this case, it's Tom Manning, who's here on the left, and just one of the video crews. And you can see we set them up right with the video folks, because those guys had to work really closely together. And when a comment was coming back that was of interest on the board for the facilitator would put his hand up, the instructor would call on him, and then it was kind of a radio broadcast view that would go in the camera. He would report out where Mary from Toledo wants to say that her opinion on this is blah, blah, blah. And then there was just an amazing exchange that happened between people in the room saying, I really like what Mary from Toledo said, but I want to do this other comment. So it was very live, very interactive. We're just extremely pleased with that part of it. So summary. If you're going to do this kind of more intensive, if you want to raise the level of the engagement to the next level, it really takes some work. You got to invest in it. You got to know what you're going after. You got to get each presenter to not only buy into the fact that their content is going to be out on the web, but that their interaction is going to be there too, and that they're going to be live, and that they need to talk to the camera, the internet, and that they have to be flexible. You need a chat room moderator in each room, definitely 2-camera video. Some little things around AV room. We were actually the integrator on this, so we worked, and some of the setup wasn't quite right, and we had to tweak that. Yeah, expect people to come and go more than you might think. You have to have active help desk inside every single workshop session. We tried to have another place. We had a help desk right in the site. All they had to do was get out of their session, click on help desk, go. Nobody would do that. So we had to chat right there with them where they are, make it very easy for them to get assistance, or they get really irritated. And then we had some workshop folks who brought videos in the room that hadn't been processed, hadn't been set up. So you have to roll with the punches. The overall results were that the attendee satisfaction was high, even though the revenue was not. They came close to break even. They had about 150 attendees. It really served as an organizational proof point. They've already committed to doing it again at their annual, and they're adding their summer session, their summer conference as well. I don't know if you can read these quotes, but I love these. Overall, I give you guys an A+. The members thanking the organization for taking the risk and doing this. Next year, they're going to add a trade show. They're going to ramp up the marketing. They're going to Anaheim. I didn't mention it, but we did telephone breakouts. So in the rooms during the sessions, when people were at the tables, we took and randomly assigned people who were who were the remote attendees into telephone breakout rooms, and during the time, 5 or 10 minutes, they were working together, talking together about the material, and that was very exciting. They loved that. And then they came back into the room, and they would chat into the room what the results were, and just leverage this year's success on the promotions.
I think this is fascinating, Lance. The extra challenges to really integrate a virtual audience with the physical audience to actually discuss in a workshop setting, and some of the ways that you highlighted that makes it different. How much does the fact that this workshop is also in the cyberspace affect the experience of the people on site?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Here we certainly have the bright lights, but otherwise I don't think we're seeing, certainly we have no downside and we have the extra participation, but how did it affect the physical?
That's a great question. So if you guys were in a workshop right now and we were forcing microphones in your mouth every time you wanted to talk, and it was going on for 3 hours, that could get irritating. And that was a real concern of Learning Forward, is how would the people on site view this kind of, deeper engagement that we were going after. And it just turned out to not be a problem, and they were everyone was excited, right? No one had done this before, it was new, and just the fact that there were 100 people in the room, 200 people joining them from the outside, so bringing in more wisdom on the topic at hand was more of a plus than anything was a minus.
Now, in your case with a workshop, it would be entirely live. Was there an archived version?
They're continuing to sell the archives, although I don't know what your experience is. Their experience are that the archives of these workshops are not selling that well, and that kind of makes sense. It's 3 hours. If you don't have the context and you're not able to ask questions, it's different than watching a canned 45 minutes, 60-minute thing. But they do have the site. The site looks just like it did when it was live, and it continues to be up, and it's accessible to everybody who, bought the online thing. They now have an archive for a year or something where they can go back and review it.
Now, in your case, Karen, people could access this content anytime over, I think it was a 2-week period. Mm-hmm. How much did you see people consuming all the content at once, or gradually coming and going? Did it fall off over the 2 weeks?
Oh, there was, we saw fairly consistent levels of participation in terms of the number of people who were in the site at any given time. We also had fairly consistent numbers of people who would log into the synchronous live chats. We left the site open for actually 3 months after the first live conference, and we had actually advertised that would be the case, so that after the CEU period, after the period when all the presenters would be available for discussions and so forth, you would still be able to go back and have access to the content. That tailed off very fast and very sharp. And so for our second iteration, we cut that time period way back, and we didn't make it part of the pitch. It was like a premium for people who had participated.
And what was your experience with live versus archive?
We're seeing, and I mentioned earlier, the licensing requirements. So different states queue up at different times throughout the year. And so say California, if the date is August, we have an increase in use of the archive material around that date. If it's November, there's a collection of other states. In November, we've seen that uptick as well. So I think there's a connection to CE and the actual requirement that they have to have it, and they know it's available.
How important is interaction? All of the virtual event platforms are adding in chat and various social media features. Clearly, talking with the speakers was important to you. Did you use other chat, or were the attendees able to talk to each other?
In the virtual exhibit, they were. I mean, one of our goals was to deliver a networking experience, and it was really neat to see members connecting to members. And again, a lot of that was based on, hey, do you know of any jobs in a particular region, or asking questions about a particular topic. One of the things for several speakers that we asked all the speakers who were going to be streamed and made on demand to be available to answer questions. Some actually agreed after the fact that if a question came up in the on-demand viewing, that they were available to answer that. And that's happened a few times, which I think the audience really appreciated.
I would just say that was a hope of ours with the Learning Forward, but it didn't happen. The workshop presenters, they're professionals, they're traveling 100 days a year, and to get their commitment to do the session was great. They absolutely did that. To get them to do some work ahead of time with us, yes, they did that, but to get them to log in and continue the discussion, which would be so valuable because there are boards and everything that can just continue it, they said no.
Lori, do we have questions from the audience? Anyone over here? This is a well-behaved audience who waits for the microphone. Thank you.
Unusual.
So 2 panelists have paid for events to which they're hoping to add a sponsored or trade show component next year. And one panelist has had an experience where there's clearly a tension between having 2 revenue streams, because you charge a fee, the numbers drop, that upsets the sponsors. So I wonder if the panel could give some idea of in what conditions the 2 revenue streams might be able to coexist, and if there is a model where that would work.
I can hit on that because in our experience, a lot of the challenge has been the economic conditions. So if the built industry is hit very hard, that transcended to our suppliers, that transcended to our partners, that transcended to the exhibitors. So maybe in 2 years, there may actually be a revenue model that could be gelled together to where sponsorship, advertising on the site and whatnot really becomes the money maker for us to cover the cost. Our goal is not always to generate revenue as much as just cover cost. Anything, after is a bonus for us.
I have a feeling that for us to successfully build a sponsorship exhibit revenue stream, we will need to make our vendor community have the aha moment that says, aha, and exhibiting in an online event is not a close but not quite there simulation of an in-person exhibit. It's a whole different thing. And we need to help them think differently about what they expect from it, and what we have to help them think differently about it, and we have to think differently about it. And I'm not sure that our thinking has evolved to the point yet where we can make that clear to them.
Other questions?
We have one last question in the back.
So you haven't had sponsors yet for this medical show. Are you restricted in any way by federal regulations against sponsorship in an educational environment?
Good question. We currently are fairly unrestricted, but we do have new requirements for continuing education that will kick in next year that will require very strict separation of sponsorship from educational content. I haven't seen the final form of those regs yet, so that will be a big factor.
And we're tied by that as well. Any sponsorship slides that are in the streamed or on demand have to be right up front and before any of the educational type content starts. And that is a concern in our ability to convince some of the sponsors that they will get viewed.
All right, is our time up? All right, thank you very much in the room and on the web for coming, and thank you very much.